In this lesson, we'll make a night version of this scene. To do that, we'll need to adjust the lighting. But first, let's click on the asset editor, and let's get set with some preview settings that will render very quickly. First, let's switch on progressive, and then for quality, let's slide our slider down to low, so we can preview things quickly. Also, click on render output, and we can lower the resolution here. I'll go with 800. Another thing that will help it render quickly, click on the flyout and click on the global illumination, and remember that we can set the primary rays to a radiance map. One more thing we can do to preview the lighting faster is check on material override. One thing to be careful though, we should check and make sure that the glass won't get overridden so that we can see whatever light we do have passing through. To do that, click on the Materials tab. In the Material list, make sure you have the glass selected and click on the flyout menu. And if you scroll down the list near the bottom, click on Options and scroll down further, you see there's a checkbox here for Can Be Overridden. So in this case, the glass would be overridden or would be opaque. We want the glass to still work or let any sort of light through that we have out there. So we'll go ahead and uncheck this option. I'll fly this menu back in. Now we're starting to get into the territory of lighting. So we want to turn out the lights more or less. Let's go to the Light tab. And for the sunlight here, we want to click here to turn it off. There's more light than just the sunlight that will enter the scene though. Back over in the settings, there's an option for environment here. Go ahead and click on that. And currently it's using a sky map. We want to turn that map off so that the sky isn't casting light as well. Right click and go ahead and clear that. Now if the background is black, there'll be zero light in here, which will be way too dark for a night scene. So instead, let's click on this swatch and let's switch this to a saturated blue color, something like what you see here. Then I'll close that down. Another thing we have to think about is now that we've darkened the lighting, we're going to need to adjust the exposure of the camera. So click on the camera option here, and where the exposure value is, I happen to know that 7 would be fairly good for what we're doing here. So go ahead and set that. So after you've set up some quick draft settings, and you've done a few things to change the lighting for this scene, let's go ahead and click render to preview what we've done. Once you're comfortable with the environment lighting, it's time to add some artificial lights to the interior. So let's go ahead and do that. Go back over into SketchUp, and we'll start by handling the standing lamp here. We're actually going to use 2 lights to help with this. For one, we'll start with a spotlight that we don't actually put inside this light, but instead put into a general region of the scene so that we can add some lighting to the furniture overall. So to do that, in the V-Ray toolbar, click on the spotlight, and let's go ahead and click where we think is roughly above this table here. Then we'll move this light into position, and what we're trying to do is get back so that when we're back where the camera is, that this will appear to be just behind that light. Next, let's go back to the standing lamp. In orbit so you can get underneath it, we'll add a sphere light on the inside. So click on that sphere light tool and click to add a sphere light and move it down just a little bit so it's not intersecting anything. Next, let's go over to these hanging lights. For these, let's go ahead and make sure that you get inside of the innermost component so that we can place the light there. In this case, we're going to use the IES light. Go ahead and navigate to the Assets folder and pick the 10.ies file and click Open. Then click to place it. Notice that it places an IES light in all of the instances of the component at the same time. Then you can get outside of that component and come back over to the beginning of the scene. One last thing, on the floor next to us here, we'll draw a plane light. So click on that tool and draw one on the floor. Then let's move it up. And it's going to be a fill light, so let's point it back at the space. Remember, the white side should face towards the space there. And take the scale tool and scale it up a bit to about that size. Then I'll click back on the Scene tab, and I want to place this so that it's something like what you see here on my screen. One more thing to keep in mind, if you've been clicking on the Render Camera scene, then you may have inadvertently turned that layer back on for the environment. So just make sure if that's going on that not only have you checked that off, but that you've updated the scene to reflect that. Now we'll want to preview how these artificial lights look, but we'll want to do it in the context of how they interact with the materials in the scene. So back over in your Settings tab, make sure to go down and check off the Material Override function. And then let's scroll up, click on Interactive to switch on Interactive Rendering Mode. and then let's start an interactive render. We can see immediately that a bunch of new light renders into the scene. Let's go ahead and stop the interactive render right away though. We want to disable all of the lights except for the spotlight so we can concentrate on it first, and then we'll layer the others back in. So to do that, let's click on the Light tab. Now you'll notice here that we have some sky portals in the list, and for me, this third one here, the one that says Sky Portals number 2, if I twirl out the menu while I've selected that, that's actually that last rectangle light I just drew. And so even though it says Sky Portals, we see here it's not a portal light, so it was just incrementally named. That could kind of trick you, so we want to make sure we rename that, and we'll call it Fill Light. Let's also disable that fill light, and we'll also disable the IES light and the sphere light so that we can focus on just the V-Ray spotlight. Now let's restart the interactive render. This allows us to clear out all of that extra light, but we can quickly draw a region around just the area of the spotlight so we can focus there first. Back over in the asset editor, let's pick the spotlight. One of the first things we should do is set the decay. Let's drop the menu down and pick inverse square. Now the light is way too weak. To fix that, let's go up to units and we'll set that to watts, and then let's set the intensity to 25. Now the spotlight is way too harsh. We can adjust the cone angle and the penumbra angle to widen that up and also soften its edges. Let's set the cone angle to 1.8 and the penumbra to 0.5. You can also widen the region render to see how that's impacting more of the scene. And then one more thing we should do here is warm this light up a bit. So we'll go ahead and click on that swatch and warm it up. Now we'll handle the sphere light inside of the standing lamp next, and we'll want to match the color to the spotlight we just did. So back over in the asset editor, you can right click on this swatch and click copy, then go over to the sphere light, right click and paste. Be sure to enable it so you can actually see it. Next, pick the IES light. Let's turn that one back on, and let's warm that color up as well. And then finally, let's come back over to the fill light. I'll redraw my region here, and then come back over and enable the fill light. First thing, we don't want to actually see the light, so let's go over here and check on invisible. Next, for the color, let's use a color similar to what we used for the environment lighting earlier. Now the last thing, it's far too bright, so let's go ahead and reduce the intensity. You can play around with the value, and I'll settle on 6. I'll clear the region over here so I can take a quick look at how this is all coming together. Notice if I draw a region around just the shadowing here, these shadows are far too harsh. This is something we can fix back with the spotlight. So I'll click on the spotlight, and our shadow radius is at 0, so we can slide this slider over to see how it impacts those shadows. I'll settle on a value of 2, and you see that's looking nicer there, and you can draw another region here to see how it impacts those shadows as well. Once I've resolved any issues like that, I'll stop the render, and back over in the Settings tab, we'll add one more effect. Under the Camera menu, click on Effects, and we'll add some vignetting. I'll set it to a value of 0.3. Then we'll create a higher quality render. So I'll check off Interactive, set the quality to Medium, make sure you've disabled any regions, and then go ahead and click Render. While the image is rendering, let's go ahead and apply some color corrections. You can apply any that you'd like. I'm going to go to the hue saturation and saturate the image a bit more. And then I'll also go down to the curve and adjust the contrast a bit.